Welcome to another episode of Command Control Power. Just wanted everybody to see the sign there.
I like that.
Hey, so you guys who sent it? Jerry, you sent the that really funny Casey Kasem like meltdown. That was so I did not know the reference because Sam, were you quoting Lebowski or where's the?
No,
where's
I was quoting Casey Kasem when he's like, "It's ponderous, man."
Yeah, I think the ponderous thing was like quoted. I think that was used in The Big Lebowski, maybe. But that I had never heard that original. It was really, really good, and it just reminded me. So of course that reminds me of the famous meltdown of Bill O'Reilly, which I know you know, Sam. The whole like, what does it mean to play us out? Like he's reading the script and he doesn't understand the phrasing of like the end roll thing or whatever, and he's like, what does it mean to play us out to end the show? And he's like swearing and losing his mind and stuff. And then he's like, "All right, and we'll do it live," So it's this whole like meltdown and like heroic save by Bill O'Reilly of like reading out, the show. Yeah. But I was wondering if you guys have ever had that happen with a client, because I'm listening to Casey Kasem like say like, "Who told me to read this? Why?" And he's like freaking out. And there's times where I'm pretty sure I'm muted, you know what I mean? Where I'm like, I need to blow off some steam like off the call, but the call's still going on. So this is one reason I like to not do video with a client, and also like why you have to have a very reliable mute button. So have you guys ever had a moment where you thought, or maybe where you found out that you were, letting loose and a client might have overheard some of that? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've had scares where I've actually hung up with a client and then I've said some expletives as soon as the call ended. And then I look at my phone for a moment. I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I hung up. And it's like, oh God, no, it was disconnected. Where I've said some pretty harsh stuff as soon as the call ended.
I have a particular paranoia about screen sharing my screen, because I never know, because sometimes I'll even forget that so I had actually another tech working with me doing something, and I had to share my screen so he could see inside the network. And then when he was done, I was so pissed because he didn't do a good job and he still left me hanging. So I started texting people. I was like, man, this guy sucks. Like I was texting and the screen sharing was still active.
No.
So that was pretty bad. I'll never know to this day if he saw it. He never said anything, but
that's rough. I mean, and I know you had this problem, Jerry. I don't know if this affected you, Sam, or if it affected other apps, but like the mute issue when iOS 17 first came out. And like it definitely happened with Ring Central. I don't know if it was like all VoIP apps or, phone service apps or whatever, but like you would, you'd mute and then you'd unmute and then it would like remute. So I'd be like, because I use that all day long. Like I'm muting constantly, like clear my throat or, again, say goodbye to Ashley or whatever it is, And so I'm like muting and unmuting constantly, and clients don't know that's happening. They're just, and it's great. Works really well until this issue where you'd mute and then you'd unmute and then it would like remute. And I was thinking like the opposite would be way worse, if you're just in the middle of like venting or something and it unmutes itself. But the fact that that can happen, a bug like that can make it to production, really concerns me about like how reliable is mute, because that's mission critical for me. So I want like a physical mute. Yeah.
Whenever I'm on mute,
you
I'm
test
just like,
it?
can you hear me? I'm like, okay, good.
Yes. Totally. I've done the same thing. Yeah.
I've got a very needy cat. So my cat, as you probably have heard on the show, she'll be moaning the blues sometimes during a tech call, and you can't mute the cat. There's no cat mute that I can buy. There's not an
show title. Can't mute the cat. That's a good show title. Yeah. I mean, that occurred to me like with that thing you sent. That was really, really funny. But so Jerry, you called this meeting. Do you want to kind of lead us into some of your major topics?
Well, from our Patreon show, we were discussing just as the show was ending. I think one of the last things I shared was a problem with going to a tech support professional at Vanguard, which is a mutual fund company here in the US. And it was procedurally, I wanted to get prices on treasury bills, right? And I must preface that, it's not like I have all kinds of money that I'm throwing around every 3 to 6 months and buying new treasury bills. But my daughter, we had an investment for her that's going towards college. She's in college now. So we had, minimum treasury that was coming up for reinvestment. And with Vanguard, it's a little tricky because you can't just check a box and say automatically reinvest this again once it reaches its maturity date. And these are 6-month T-bills. So you have to go through these little steps to get there. And ultimately, I wanted to document it. So I got a tech support guy on the phone, and he was taking me through the steps, and I'm taking screenshots, go here. And then I was going to, append them and then do some annotation and save it, as a PDF like we do. And we got to the last step where it was going to load in the fresh prices of the treasury bills that were coming up for auction. They call them coming up for auction, but you just go in there and you indicate a purchase, and that's just a term. Mm-hmm. And the screen wasn't popping up. Like the screen, there was supposed to be a refreshed window within the Vanguard account that I was logged into.
Right.
And he said, are you on a Mac or a PC? And I said, no, I'm on a Mac. He said, okay, I'd like you to go to settings, system preferences for, he said, what browser are you in? Safari. And I'm like, every step of the way, I'm like, okay, I'm there. I'm there. And what we had to do was enable cross website tracking. I believe that's what they call it. Right, guys?
Yeah, I think you're right.
So.
You're good.
Yep. Okay. So that box needed to be ticked off. And the reason why is because the Vanguard interface reaches out to an independent source to display this window within their secure environment. So the cross website tracking needed to be enabled for the current prices to show up. And so as soon as I ticked it off, it reloaded, and the guys he said, that's amazing. He said, I've never had anybody like quickly, resolve that issue
right.
ever, because you must be like some sort of a computer genius. I said, well, no, I actually do this for a living. So
right.
I know exactly what you go through when you probably lead people to solve this problem. And he was saying, interestingly enough, that in Google Chrome, I think it's, he said it was the other way around, where I think he said you had to check a box because normally it's disabled as well. And I think I don't know out of the box whether Safari has cross website tracking enabled or disabled, but he said whatever happens on Google Chrome, the default is just the opposite of what you would do on Safari.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's a good one to know about because, it started to affect me. I think, Sam, you had some more comments about the Microsoft portal, like the admin portal. That's where I saw this issue. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, specifically with me, it was, and I think I'm not the only one, obviously, but when loading any of the subpanes of the Microsoft 365 admin portal, like you can go to users and display the list of active users, or excuse me, you can display the sub list. And then once you click on users, nothing happens.
Nothing happens. It's right.
Yeah. And then when you hit the refresh button, and I should have screenshot this, but it was the reload with like protection features disabled, something to that effect. And when you do that and you reload it, then the page lets you go to any of the directories below.
Yeah.
But that's works. It's an ominous term though, right? To disable protection,
Right.
First inclination is not to do that.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Well, and this, for some reason I noticed this, did you mention this, Sam, only in private browsing versus like just regular?
Well, Safari? I actually do most of it in private. So we can do a live test as we're talking, but what do you see?
And this, well, to that point, Chris Haver in the chat mentioned that containers. So he says Firefox with containers is a must when managing multiple tenants. So I use profiles in Safari now for the same reason, which I think we talked about a couple months ago when this came out or shortly thereafter. And I've been starting to set those up like for some of the larger clients that I manage, and then also for myself, because I was finding like I'm going into private browsing for my own management of Google admin, for example, Microsoft admin for multiple different clients, and then having to like re-authenticate with two-factor or multi-factor every time I unlock the private window later when I remember what the heck I was in the middle of doing, and then like try to go finish managing the user or whatever. So that definitely helps with this issue. But where I had seen this was in private browsing specifically. And the clue, so for a couple days, it was a real problem. And then all of a sudden, I noticed after like, refreshing the page or whatever causes that banner to come up at the top, you just basically do what a user would do. You refresh like 3 times in a row, like what the heck's going on? And then they display the banner like, hey, are things messed up? Like try clicking here, it's like, great, thanks. So yeah, it's an interesting problem and solution, I guess, because you do want that stuff to be secure in general, but apparently a lot of vendors are using, I don't know, like other embedded or referenced, or I'm not sure if it's a frame or what the issue is, like why
I think it's a frame.
It's a cross-site issue. Yeah. It's interesting.
In Vanguard's case, it was a frame. Now, if you use profiles in Safari, Joe, does it honor that setting for one profile and the other you can disable it?
Wow. Well, no, okay. So you don't even bother with that. Yeah. So I just set up a different profile for each major client. And then for my own like internal stuff, I have like, here's another example, Squarespace. I have for managing our site, for my business website, and then personal stuff. So there's, it used to be that I could easily, I forget, I guess I was just logging out, logging back in. So now I just don't have to do that. I can just have a profile for personal and a profile for work. And, I can have 2 different accounts logged in. It's almost like having 2 different instances of that browser is essentially how to think about profiles.
Yeah.
So I'm just logged in. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what Chris mentioned about Firefox. And I was using Arc browser for that when Arc came out. And that was actually suggested by Tidbits Content Network when they mentioned Arc browser. And so I started using that for a few of my clients. I remember how excited I was about profiles, and I was talking about it on the show, and Jerry was like, dude, you can already do that in other browsers. That's right. Like, all right. Well, I was excited about it. Like but yeah, I think that's the key point is profiles.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. That's the key. Because that avoids this whole, I think it avoids the cross-site issue, because I actually haven't had that in a non-private window. So I think maybe like in the private window, the protections are higher or something like that. So that may be the root of like why we're starting to see this with, specifically Microsoft admin. But yeah, profiles for the win across the board. It just makes it much, much easier. On the heels
that
of
takes care of, I was going to say that takes care of the minutes for the previous meeting, I think, right, Joe?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we also have the minutes to follow up on from like many previous meetings, and these are these are the minutes that are in all caps, and it's mostly me and Sam. It's the 1Password, follow up, I guess we'll call it. So we have a love-hate relationship with 1Password around here. I recommend it to my clients if they're, if they need more than what iCloud Keychain gives them, which is anybody in business, who needs to share passwords among their team members or outside the company or like in a family across multiple users. Although now we have, keychain sharing, I forget what it's called, with family sharing. So 1Password fills the gaps there. It's definitely a more enterprise level or business friendly solution. But I've been complaining about it because apparently, as Jerry says, I've been using it wrong, in that I use the features that are in the app. So I open the app and I use the features that are there. And apparently I shouldn't use those features, according to Jerry, because they, they're not meant to be used in business the way I use them. I should use, what is it? Hoodoo instead for documentation.
You could use Hoodoo to have your, unique portals for your clients. Sure. But you're trying to save money. You get 1Password for free. I get it. You've got a lot of overhead traveling around the country, going to all those rock and roll concerts that you go to.
Where's my tool beanie? I should be wearing it. Well, so okay. And this is a comment, by the way, not from someone in the chat, but from our very own Jerry. So the reason I'm running into issues with 1Password is because I'm using secure notes, and I'm using that to just store like, unstructured information about my clients. It might be like a, door entry code. It might be like a, information about how their systems are set up or whatever. It's just basic, informational stuff that's not super secure necessarily, but it's, it's proprietary to the client. And then certainly some secure data, like individual usernames and passwords for different services. That's all stored in a secure node in 1Password. And it used to be that I could use Command F. I don't know if you guys have ever searched for something on the Mac, but Command F will bring up a field.
Wait a minute, let me write this down.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah, what is it? Which key is the which key is the command key?
Yeah, so command's going to be next to the space bar.
Okay, all right. And then what? Command S?
I think you're hitting Control, but yeah, it's the other command key.
All right.
So, and then F as in find. So just think of like I'm trying to find something, Command F for find. Okay.
That's a good tip, Joe.
I know. This is why
Sam,
people sign
don't forget
up.
to put that in notes.
That's why it's fine.
Show notes. So I'll use Command F to find things, and 1Password just started crapping out with Command F. It just won't find it. Yeah, but so you can find the note that contains the thing you're looking for, but then you can't find the thing in the note. So I know I'm using it wrong. I have too many notes. It's just a page or two of notes. It's just too much. I'm not supposed to do that. So now 1Password, thanks to Adam Rice in Slack, brought this to my attention that search is now able to use the text in secure notes to display matches in the drop-down results under the search bar.
Nice.
So that's an amazing multiple year regression, restoration, bug fix, regression, and now new feature announcement that you can use search. So I'm psyched about that. I can't wait to use it. I'm very excited.
Sleep well, my friend. Sleep well.
Did you also hear?
That's our minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you also hear that 1Password just made an update to their billing methods? This just came out today, actually.
I saw that.
Where it was a waiting to be confirmed accounts apparently can still use the functions of the app. So it seems like people were skating around a billing procedure by using these accounts that they didn't actually confirm. They had access to vaults and saved passwords, and 1Password just put a lockdown on that with the kibosh, as they say.
Yeah, this is one of those that you're going to get 10 copies of this email. Like, does this affect me? What does this mean? Do I have to do anything? It's a lot. There's going to be a lot of those.
Exactly.
And it's understandable. I mean, it's like, who can parse this stuff? And they want to know, like, am I going to pay more? Like, what's happening? And it's like, no, probably like 1% of 1Password users, to your point, Sam, were like taking advantage of this feature. Like, somebody figured out, oh, guess what? You can invite someone and then they can just start using the app and you don't have to ever confirm them and you'll never have to pay, which sounds like, oh, that's where I want my passwords, in some kind of limbo state. That sounds great. Let me just do that for 10 years, But like, so 1Password's like, we're not allowing that anymore. I mean, what they probably should have done is just been like, if maybe send this email to people who have, first of all, have that on their account, like any unconfirmed users. If you don't have one, why bother people with this change?
Yeah.
Number two, maybe give everybody one user. Like, I'm sure that not everybody's like doing it on purpose. Like, maybe it's the people that have 10 unconfirmed users that you need to like pick up the phone and call and say, stop ripping us off. Anyway, it's just there's always this noise in the industry, of like changes. And anyway, I just get annoyed with this stuff because there's so many, every day there's something changing, and it's for us to address it, for free, basically. So anyway.
Truth.
That's a good
All
point,
right.
though.
I need my time. Gentlemen.
All right.
I'm staying
silent
for Jerry.
I got a whole sheet of stuff right here.
Wow.
All
Print it out.
You wrote it down?
I guess the issue,
I didn't want
to printer. Yeah.
You should have stored it in secure notes in 1Password. It would have been easier.
I did not want to flip back and forth, because I know I'm being videotaped. So
right.
there's an antiquated term. I know. On the VCR, using Foxfire.
Yeah.
All right. So I've had for many years custom builders, small installation for workstations. And for many years, they had been using Parallels, virtualizing Windows to use a version of QuickBooks that they could itemize. So there was never any parity with the Mac version of QuickBooks to the Windows version, and they needed some of the custom features that were built into Intuit Desktop for Windows. And that's a whole nother thing. Actually, Intuit just sent out an email saying that they're not going to allow people, I think in June or July, to buy new copies. So if you're an existing user using Windows or Mac desktop of QuickBooks, you can renew, but they're not going to allow new licenses, which I thought is pretty telling. So handwriting's on the wall for QuickBooks. But anyway, they want everybody to move to the cloud and have recurring fees. So these users that are, one of my clients, for many years, they've been on a managed service plan and they pay their bills. They're good Yankees, but they're thrifty. So we've had some new equipment that we've recently updated. But QuickBooks, the version of QuickBooks they were using, had been out of date for quite a while. So they were on Windows 7, and I think most of the computers were on Monterey. So even the Macs weren't even supported. And so we, at some point, upgraded them to rotational away from a rotational SS and move them to SSDs on the iMac. I'm like, no, I'm not going to say that. So anyway,
this is live, Jerry, be careful.
So this is live, so I got to watch myself.
I like the way Jerry's catching himself live. All right.
Yeah. So we had them upgrade to iMacs. What better time, right? The M2 iMacs, sir. And we got them, tricked out with terabyte drives and loaded up as much RAM as we could. And we bought all brand new versions of Windows 11 Pro. Right. And so we have this existing, we couldn't move over any of the virtual machines because that's something that you can't do with Windows 11 and installations of Parallels. You guys are aware of that, right?
I haven't dealt with Parallels in a while.
So okay.
I was not aware of that.
So but we can, back up we're using Windows only exclusively for using QuickBooks. So we backed up QuickBooks and we moved it to the new version on the primary machine that we're calling the server. Now, the way we had this set up is QuickBooks can go into multi-user mode. And that worked flawlessly. And again, we're talking about people who are not really sophisticated users, and they would put their Parallels installations in coherence, which meant that they didn't see all the other Windows jazz. They just saw the QuickBooks app working there. And I rarely got calls. I go in there once a month. I make sure everything's been updated on the Windows side, on the Mac side, everything's good. So we moved them over to this new version, and we install the virtual machine on each one of the ones, Windows 11, and we install the license copy of QuickBooks. For QuickBooks 2024, we put the primary base computer that we're calling the server in multi-user mode, and we're able to get the workstations to communicate with it. And it looks like everything's working, and I leave them and I say, sayonara, and let me know if you got any problems. So kind of along the way, they were mentioning that they were I'd get an email or a text. And this is one of those clients that texts me no matter what. And I told you, I don't really have problems with clients texting me. And these people kind of tend to overdo it. And one of the owners of the company got a little upset with me saying, I said, I reserve texting for emergencies. And he said, it was a fair question. He said, well, what do you define as an emergency? I think so anyway, the issue with QuickBooks was that all of a sudden, without warning, one of the workstations would abort. Not the primary one that had all the data that was acting as the server and that the primary office manager was working on. So she'd be working in QuickBooks, but just without any kind of correlation. So I was looking at things like network things, possibly Windows energy saver settings, power settings with Windows. Maybe the machine was going into hibernate. I don't think hibernate exists now in Windows 11. But, screen sleeping, all the things you possibly could think of. And I was able to look at this all remotely because we support them with Adigy, and I'm able to remote into the machines. I have full access and test things over the weekend. And I would get these intermittent aborts. And I couldn't figure it out. And the owners of the company were saying, geez, what's going on here? And I'm like, I don't know. We jumped forward from a, very old version of Parallels, or one that was 3 or 4 iterations back. And now we're on this new version of Parallels. But everything should work like the old computers did. And I was kind of like just up a tree, And so I got to spend more time with it over this weekend. And it was the darndest thing. So I'll tell you what it is. So and you would think that I would be able to spot this right away, but I wasn't looking for it because this feature did not exist in the old version of Parallels. And I never had to address this feature before with any of my other clients that use Parallels because there's not a lot of them, right? So here's the big buildup. So there's a setting There's
I'm
a
intrigued.
setting in options in the core functionality of Parallels where by default it will pause Windows, and you can choose the amount of time you want Windows to pause with a drop-down window, but the default is 30 seconds. So if they determine that the computer's idle for 30 seconds, it'll pause Windows. And the reason why they do this is because it says that it'll extend the Mac's battery life.
Yeah.
And this is on by default. So of course I saw it, this is it, right? So I check the box on all the workstations, monitored it for 48 hours, had never had a problem with these spontaneous aborts that QuickBooks was doing where the workstations were getting kicked out. So
that's great.
Nice.
Yeah. So this, and again, this is not a hooray for me story, but this is like, there's a larger question here of like, why is software written to assume that this is the case, that you're working on a mobile computer? Yes. Shouldn't the default be to have that disabled? And the reason why I bring this up, and this is sort of like a sticking point for me, is, and I've been in the heat of battle, I mentioned this to you guys prior to the show, is I've been working on iMacs, and there's been a couple of times where we've needed to do an update. And on the fly, I've seen a little pop-up from Apple on, I believe, Sonoma that says, make sure your MacBook battery is above 50% before performing that update. Like, why are we seeing that on an iMac?
Yeah.
And that would make like the user say,
Jerry, that's because Apple cares about your privacy. So they don't even want to know what kind of Mac you have. They don't want to know if it has a battery. They just want you to feel really private. Like, we don't even know, is this even a Mac? We can't tell. Who can tell? So, yeah. But no, in all seriousness, so that's an interesting wrinkle that it can't, sometimes Apple just gives you this like, incorrect, status of like it's on battery when it doesn't even have a battery. Right. I wonder if that's it. Maybe we should leak this to the press. Like Apple's going to come out with a battery powered iMac in the next version. Sometimes they put the code in ahead of time, so it could be getting a battery powered M4 iMac. We should just leak it right here to the press.
We got a scoop. We got a scoop. Yeah.
But no, so I'm glad you're responding this way though, in general, because I feel like this industry has so much more work to do. And I harp on this all the time, but personal computers are not new. Mobile devices are not new. We've had PCs for 40 years or whatever. We've had, iPhones for, 15 plus years or whatever it is. It's got to be almost 20 now. It's 18 years or something like that. So like, okay, at some point, like there needs to be some self-healing. There needs to be some like, auto remediations, like some kind of like thing where like you keep people out of trouble. Like why, so this is a Parallels thing. If they're trying to do the right thing by Apple, in the Mac OS, I understand that like the Mac OS does a really good job of understanding like what's a, user engagement and like a, high priority task or whatever versus like what's a thing that runs when the system is idle or versus a task that doesn't run unless the user is active. Like there's a lot of fancy stuff going on to basically optimize the power usage, not only for battery containing Macs, maybe also for like not drawing more power from the grid, in places where you're like burning coal to generate electricity. Fine. That's great. This is all good ideas. Preserve performance for like high importance things, whatever. Fine. But like Parallels should be able to say like, I don't know, it's like you have Windows file sharing enabled. You have,
some logic.
Have QuickBooks. Yeah. You have QuickBooks enabled. Like just look for the like 5 most common things that like would have an issue with this feature and just detect that and program that in,
or not make an assumption and have it on by default. I mean, why compromise my installation? And again, I was never looking for that because it didn't exist in the version of Parallels, that we got before. And I'm assuming that product is consistent, which it is, and it doesn't change. So why would I be looking for some special built-in feature that's going to extend my battery life on an iMac? Why would I even be looking for that? Right. I mean, it really, and again, I didn't spend lots and lots of time, and I didn't have a lot of egg on my face with the client. I just told them, I would work on this and we're going to resolve it. I'm thinking like, maybe we're not going to resolve it, but then that setting, they need to keep a live connection to the Mac that's or the Parallels installation that's acting as a server, because they're doing invoicing and then they're walking away, they're getting a phone call, and they're just getting booted off the network every time this would engage, and it just angered me.
Yeah, I could see why. Again, it's like, why that don't be clever. This is what I'm always telling software developers. Like, don't be too clever. You're like, if you're going to be that clever, you have to really nail it. Like, it has to be like really, really clever. It can't just be like, this is a clever thing to do in theory that we can write up as a feature item on a bullet point on a feature list. It's like, it needs to actually think through all the possible like failure modes and accommodate that. And like, don't bother creating the feature if you're not going to do all that extra work.
Would you guys care or be annoyed if a product like that instead had a little guide that started that was like, check out this new feature that does this, or would you just bypass that and be like, screw this, I don't want to do that?
Yeah, we'd all hit this.
You mean
we'd hit the skip button.
You mean like a
yeah, okay. So I'm just making sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, or can it detect like I don't know. Again, I'm probably asking for too much. If you want to be really clever, like show me the tool tips or whatever when like you detect that something happened. Like, Parallels is like, hey, Windows keeps QuickBooks keeps quitting. Like, let me try to figure out what's going on here. Like, and tell the user, hey, do you want to try disabling that setting? We keep losing access to that machine, and we can, it's Parallels across the board. Like, you might be using this feature over there. I mean, this is, again, software development is hard, but like, I wish they would do more like this. Put us out of business, please. Like, there'll be other things for us to do. Like, it's fine. We just, squashing these bugs is not like our favorite way to earn a living, is it?
So one more Parallels share. And it's actually Joe Saponare for the win on this one.
What was this?
Different client. And
I know what this is.
Yeah. And so built into Parallels is an extra add-on feature called Parallels Tools. And it's a little thing, a little icon at the top, and it allows you, it gives Parallels a little bit more extensibility.
But Jerry, sorry to interrupt, but it has nothing to do with Parallels in a certain way also, right? It's like features that are not even necessarily just related to Parallels. It's like power user like adjustments for weird stuff on your Mac, right?
Well, it affects what happens on your Mac, and I think it's called Parallels Toolbox. So I'm working with a complete. So normally we don't install that. We know that's an option, right? And so I'm working with a client that's on an Intel MacBook Pro, and she was running Ventura, and she runs Windows, a virtualized copy of Windows, and she's still running the last iteration of Windows, not the latest version of Windows 11. So inexplicably, even though she's on Adigy, the Mac updated overnight promiscuously. We're not sure if the user triggered it or not to Sonoma, and I didn't want that to happen because I wasn't exactly sure how Parallels would perform on an Intel Mac and this version of Windows. So it did it, right? So she's sort of in a lather or a dither, and I remote in, and I'm able to get everything sort of up and running, and it looks like the virtual machine launched, which is like hallelujah. We got the Windows desktop to show up, but she's not seeing anything on her Mac desktop. So I'm thinking like, oh man, like what is this? One of those bad upgrades, and I'm thinking like, oh, maybe she had iCloud Drive turned on, and then she turned it off. You know how that happens, and then it archives the stuff that's on the desktop. One of those deals. I didn't see any evidence of that, and so like I'm like, and I'm just about to leave to drive to this client to, do hands-on with it now. Cause I've been working with a remote that morning, set everything aside at appointments. It's, the client's a big priority for me. Represent a good piece of revenue throughout the year. So, my full attention. And so I reached out to you, Joe, I think, to ask you, I'm not sure exactly what I asked you, but I said something like, have you ever seen anything like this before? Or like where there's a failed Mac installation and nothing appears on the desktop. Oh, and the thing was, I could see the items on the desktop if I said show hidden files, did the keystroke to show hidden files on the Mac. So I could see that the files were there, but I had no access to the desktop folder. It's like if I moved something there, it wouldn't even show up. So I'm like, what the heck is this? So I'm talking to Joe. Joe, you were nice enough to take my call because I'm like, this was about like 10 a.m. Eastern time, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm just explaining the situation to Joe, Sam, and Joe goes,
looking for a missed call from you, but no, you didn't call me.
You were his next call, Sam. You were his very next call.
This happened a couple of weeks ago. So Joe said, and I said, yeah, she's on Parallels. And you're like, Joe says, wait a minute, Parallels? Missing items on the desktop?
Yeah.
And then you pick it up from here, Joe.
I'm like, yeah, and then I start searching our website for the show. I'm like, you talked about this, So yeah, sure enough, it's like this Parallels tools feature or toolbox or whatever it is
that I brought up on an old show.
Nice. That's right.
That I told you I remember exactly this visit because I went to this client and it was just a matter of this going up to Parallels toolbox and unchecking the box that said show or hide items on desktop. And by unchecking it, all her items appeared. But I had shared this story on the show, and I couldn't charge the guy, even though I had spent almost an hour there
at that time.
Yeah.
Oh, so now you can, right? Now you eventually kind of got paid for it, essentially. Over, I didn't get paid.
I was able
either time. So I'm just here to provide.
But it sort of reminds me of the time that I drove to that client's site and I'm looking at all the work in here. I'm like, who did this? And it was me. I had been to this residential client.
Nice.
Before. It's man. Like I'm thinking I'm not going to say it. Reminds me of a political figure that has recently come up in the press is what I'm going to say, what I was alluding to.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So those are my parallel stories.
Nice. Good ones.
And
this is the first time hearing of them, of course, so it's good to hear how you resolved it for me.
But this is why it pays.
To listen to our show.
It pays to listen to the show, and it pays to have really good show notes, which are always lovely show notes done by Sam. You can cross-reference these things at any time.
Some credit for Sam. It's good to hear.
Some love for Sam.
Yeah. Right.
Can you make a banner for him, Joe, and put it on the screen? Love for Sam or something?
I can't do that.
You can do it. I want to go to the next topic. Which is actually more parallels. I have a parallels question for you guys. So I haven't.
I'm the last guy you want to ask.
I don't know if I'm asking the right
more about
here.
parallels than he knows at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so, okay. Clients sometimes ask you, can I run a Windows partition? And the reason was, in this case, they want to run AutoCAD. And I had to Google again. I'm like, AutoCAD runs on Mac, right? So yeah, there's a version of AutoCAD for Mac. And so I asked the client, could you run the AutoCAD for Mac, and there was some reason, there's love for Mr. Apple. Nice. There was some reason that they couldn't, they need the version for Windows, and I forget exactly what it was, but there's a feature that's in there that's not in the Mac version.
Yeah. Fine. So AutoCAD for Mac is like AutoCAD Lite kind of.
Exactly. That I remember looking at that because I don't think it even came to Mac. Like their solution used to be run Parallels, and before that it was like soft Windows or something. Like that was their Mac solution for a while, I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering the right company. But yeah, so they do support the Mac sort of, but the real heavy users like that do look for specific features and need to run the Windows version. But this person has an M2, I think it's an M2, it might be an M1 Mac, and wants to run AutoCAD for Windows in, presumably in something like Parallels. So is that a viable solution? I forget where we landed in the era of Apple Silicon. Is it, does AutoCAD have to support the version of Windows that runs on ARM, is that like a requirement, or is there emulation that happens in Windows where it can like run the Intel compiled apps on the version of Parallels that runs natively on the Apple Silicon machines? I'm watching you guys both Google right now for the answer. Thank you. No, I'm just joking. So no. So what's your experience lately, Sam, with Parallels and stuff? And yeah, Jerry, besides QuickBooks, like where do you guys see this come up? Like we're running Windows on the Mac anymore?
I mean, I'll chime in and say that I don't really anymore. Maybe it's because we've started to shy away from it in a way where we used to always be like, yeah, sure, you want to run Windows stuff, get a Mac still and put it on here. And now I'm kind of like, all right, get a Windows device if you really need it. Like, I just don't. I think because of I think the reason for me is because the only clients that I have that need that are CAD users. So I'm like, I don't want to deal with I know CAD or AutoCAD rather, is very heavy-handed. It needs a lot of processing power, a lot of memory. Yeah. So I'm sure Apple Silicon could do it because of the power behind it, but I haven't bothered, and I just go straight up PC in that sense.
Yeah, it's also
as long as it supports
a lot of times, right?
Yeah,
like,
as long as it supports.
Go ahead.
As long as it supports Windows 11 AutoCAD in this particular case, then it's going to run fine. And I can tell you that Windows 11 Pro runs really, really fast. It blazes. Reboots are crazy quick. Yeah.
Wow. All right, that's good info. I mean, because like a lot of times it's a question of support. Like a vendor will see that you're running their software in a VM on a Mac and just sort of say like, we disclaim all responsibility for this because like who knows. But sometimes you can still get support, so maybe it's not a deal breaker. So yeah, that's interesting. That's really good info. I'll basically just recommend Parallels, Windows 11, and AutoCAD, and hope for the best. I might also like reevaluate the machine and say, kind of like no guarantees on the level of performance. But to your point, Sam, like I still think Apple Silicon, like even like obviously even emulating or virtualizing like Intel, for Intel code, like the Rosetta 2 translation layer is like extremely, efficient because of that power of the Apple Silicon, like how far they leapt ahead like Intel. Yeah. So I have to imagine it would work fine probably, right?
I would be curious to hear after, the client implements it to see what their feedback is, because it's not like I've had a big need for this, but I'd be curious to know. So the next time, like, hey, this can, not based on my experience, but a colleague, this can be a viable solution.
Yeah, exactly.
But that is a really good
test case. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joe. I was really dreading getting into some sort of conversation with Intuit technical support and trying to mask that we were virtualizing it, because I knew I would get into, discussion where they would just, like you say, throw up their hands and say, we don't know. But
maybe that's why
functions.
Yeah, maybe that's why Parallels Toolbox exists, so you can just hide the Mac desktop and then they won't be any of the wiser. It's like pretend you're on Windows is like one of the features, for masking that for vendors. Yeah, I wonder. Well,
Jerry, you're tapped out of your stories, man.
No, I can go all. I'm like Joe tonight. I've got a whole yarn.
Let it rip. Yeah, spin us a yarn.
All right. So we've got a couple of medical offices that we still support with Mac Practice, and Mac Practice merrily rolls along. And if you don't know anything about Mac Practice, they are hosted. Their program is hosted on a server computer. So you designate a Mac Mini, M2 headless, or a Mac, some sort of version of a Mac Pro, and talks to workstations. But
what's the recommended way to back up Mac Practice, Jerry? Just because if you're
beat me to it.
if you're running this on a Mac, and you've got all your data there, how do you? I'm just curious, like how do you back that up?
I believe we have a banner for this particular technology that you might be referring to, Joe. I think you're probably talking about Dolly Drive.
I had it at the ready. Yeah. So one of us had to derail your story and bring that up.
It's just a requirement. I was like, do I interrupt him and say it?
All right, we're going to retire that banner now for a while. I'm sure you're
if it's on the drinking card, though, please drink up.
Yeah, and please continue, Jerry.
What about Cloud Miros? You didn't even mention that.
That'll be the new banner.
Well, you just did, so I think
there you go.
all things being equal. So Mac Practice, they're in Nebraska, and they do a lot of the development, I think, for their program here in the US, and then they outsource their support. I didn't know this at the time. I've spoken to their support. Their support opens at 8 a.m. on Central Time, and usually I speak with somebody who sounds like they're US based. But they're woefully behind in trying to keep up with Apple's security updates, and just the slightest thing, if you look at the program sideways, it breaks. And inevitably, you have to have a tech log into the server, do command line voodoo, sometimes reinstall, sometimes download a special iteration of the server software to get it to work. So I got contacted by my client, and I've done this before. We were requested to remotely back up and update the Mac Practice server because they were getting messages that they needed to update to the latest version. So Saturday morning, made sure that all the workstations were logged out, and I remoted into the office. And I noticed that they're running Ventura. I knew they were running Ventura, but they were on 13.6.1 maybe. So, they needed to move to 13.6.4, which came out on January 22nd, right? So a couple of weeks ago at the time of this recording, if not longer, right? Mm-hmm. So a while ago, right? 13.6.4. So I take a backup of the Mac Practice server. That takes a little while. I upgrade the Mac, and I download the updated version of the server software, and I try to log in, and I'm getting a message that says the network connection was lost, which is really weird because it logs into localhost. So it's being self-hosted on the server for the primary machine that I'm working on, and all the other machines connect to it with a static IP address on the LAN. Mm-hmm. So I go to one of the other workstations and update that to the latest version of Mac Practice. And I just try to log in with the workstation, and I get the same message. So now it's Saturday. They start their business at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, and they have blocks and blocks of patients, like, somebody at, 8, somebody at 8:15, somebody at 8:20. I mean, they see dozens and dozens of people. It's, they do physical therapy, among other things. So there's people marching in and out of there all day long. And I've gotten calls to provide support for them at 7 a.m. or even before 7 a.m. where one of the office staff is in there and they can't get Mac Practice to work. And sometimes I have to reboot the server and make sure the server software is running. So, and when this happens, right, the physicians and the medical practitioners are there on site and they can't see the schedule. And so all eyes fall on the office manager, and they inevitably fall on me, right? And this is a high priority client for me too.
Sure.
So I'm like, what am I going to do? So I've got I made the obligatory call into the Nebraska technical support. We open up 8 a.m. Central Time, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know. So I immediately alert the key people in this office, including the office manager. And I said, do you have the cell phone of your sales rep? Maybe we could text him and maybe he could do us a solid and, special dispensation. So I don't hear back. She's not happy. I know, and so I actually talked to her, while I was still working on things, and I'm trying everything, I'm trying to, instead of changing it to local host, changing it to the IP address of itself. I'm putting in the look back, nothing's working. Wow. So the reason why this wasn't working is because they weren't compatible with the security update, but I didn't know that at the time, right? So they've released the software, but they're not compatible with the latest version of Ventura. But they're
not compatible with Ventura as of now. That's kind of insane.
13.6.4. There's 13.6.4.
Ventura, I agree. Like that's insane. Yeah, that's right.
But it'll work with Ventura. It just didn't work with 13.6.4. It worked with 13.6.1. It's just that the latest, the nag screen that they got when every time they log into the server, one of the workstations says, "You have a new update. You need to update. Download this update."
Of course,
yeah. Not for Mac, but for Mac Practice.
Right.
So you know me, right? I'm like a dog with a bone sometimes, and I don't let things go. And this is my nobody's going to help me here, right? I mean, and I tried to look on Slack to see if anybody. I just put a message out there, a desperate cry for help, like Sam last week. Said when he couldn't back up his Mac for 228 days or whatever it was. What was it, Sam? How many days?
Yeah, it was about 228.
Yeah. Memory. No, I edit these shows, so that's why I know the numbers. So no answer on Slack, and I wouldn't expect to, because everybody is dog and Mac practice anyway. Like, who wants to work with it, right? Especially when you're in these situations. So what do? I'm not going to let this go. So I start looking on LinkedIn, and I start looking for who works for Mac practice, right? So I find a gentleman who's the technical support supervisor on LinkedIn for Mac practice, right? He's my guy. He's the guy.
He's the exact guy you need. Yeah.
Right. But I can't connect with him because I'm not going to pay for LinkedIn. I don't know what they ask, but whatever it is, I don't subscribe. I just sort of, I lurk in LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn lurker.
Wait, you can't connect? You can't say, I want to connect with you and I need help right now?
Not if they're... Well, Sam might know about this because he's Mr. Apple, but no, you can't, right, Sam?
Well, long story separate. I tried to contact someone who was the same thing. You had to pay for LinkedIn Plus to message them.
Right.
Okay.
Or unless you're connected already, kind of a thing.
Right.
So I got the guy's name, and he's not like John Smith. It's a little bit more specific than that. So I go to Facebook, and I find his...
Wow.
And hiking pictures,
I know. I find his Facebook profile.
This is my fear when I don't respond to your text fast enough, Jerry. I'm like looking out my window, he's gonna find me. He will get his response.
Ashley's gonna be like, Jerry just texted me. He wants to talk to you.
Exactly. Jerry's on Facebook right now, a messenger.
So I messaged him on Facebook, and I said, hey, I'm an Apple certified consultant from Connecticut. And by the way, I just passed the test. No, I didn't say that. And I said, look, I upgraded and I can't, this is the error message I'm getting. And he was very nice. He was very polite, and I was very polite. And I said, I know this is above and beyond, but if there's any way you could connect me with somebody, I would really appreciate it. And he said, well, I'll put the message out there, but the best thing is to, Monday morning at 7 a.m. So I didn't have much hope. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, because of HIPAA and that sort of thing, and here I am, and I'm saying who I am, but whoever is going to deal with me may be dealing with me outside of the office, and that may not fly.
Yeah, it's total back channel thing to go through Facebook and say, help me, I'll get you connected remotely or something. It's like, it's like, who are you? What are, it's like, you got to follow protocol. Yeah, it makes sense. I can appreciate that.
Because we have some money that we have for you, $300,000, and all you need to do is email us and we can send that to you. But
that's right.
We need your bank account to do that.
That's right.
So not even a few hours later, 5 hours later, he texts me again through Facebook, and he said, shoot me your number and we'll see what we could do. And this was on Saturday night, right? And we were just finishing up dinner. My wife and I went out to dinner. And so I sent him the number, and I turned off silence all unknown calls on my iPhone for the weekend, right? I disabled that. And Sunday evening around 6:30 Eastern time, this call comes in, and it's a guy from Mac Practice. It's a tech support guy who works for them. He was in the office. I don't know why he was in the office, but he was in the office. Why? I think I have an idea. And he hooked me up. So I got him connected with Splashtop because that's the product that they use. And he's like, oh yeah, this is, the version we have isn't compatible with 13.6.4, the latest version of Ventura.
But we do have changed. Like, why is it not? I'm stuck on this.
Security. Yeah. It was security patches. Yeah. He says, but we do have a workaround. And so what he had to do was he had to release to me a super secret squirrel version, skunkworks version of Mac Practice,
right, to
get the thing running. And we didn't have to recover from a backup, but we had to go into the sparse bundle, get the super secret long sparse bundle password, plug that into the new version or the version that he released. So it was a number of steps, took about an hour, but it was definitely, not like, oh, you should have done this before that. It was like, no, there would be no freaking way that this version would work. So, during those times where, somebody's working with you like that and he's a professional and you like to think of yourself as a professional, make a little bit of small talk. And I said, where are you? Exactly. Are you in Nebraska? And he said, no, I'm not in the United States. I'm in a country. He says, I'll give you a hint. It begins with E. I'm like, E.
Estonia?
That's what I said. I said Estonia.
Yeah.
He's in Egypt.
Wow.
And they've been performing technical support. They don't write code for Mac Practice he said he's been working with this company for 3 years. And they've been doing Mac Practice technical support even longer. So when they open up 8 a.m. Central Time, his day starts at 4. Sam, you're going to feel terrific after you hear this because you're always complaining that you're working too hard. This guy's day starts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and he finishes up at 1 a.m.
Wow.
That's because it lines up with their support hours.
Right.
And when he was helping me at 7 o'clock on Sunday night, it was 2 a.m. I'm like, man, I can't thank you enough. You're just like, thank you so much.
That's amazing. Right? That is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. An incredible
He's probably used to those hours, I would assume too, though. I mean,
I would think so. Yeah.
Wow.
And so he got contacted by not the guy that I contacted through LinkedIn, but his technical support representative in the United States who, she was messaged by the guy that I reached out to. And so they did us a total solid by that. And so
I'm still stuck. I'm still stuck on this because yes, they did you a solid. I mean, like you went to heroic efforts to track these people down totally outside of their normal support. Yeah. and Jerry, for once, I want you to have a hooray for me story because you're always telling us it's not a hooray for me story. This is a hooray for me story. The medical practice was going to be dead in the water and you made sure that didn't happen, and so you did whatever it took. You found this guy, you tracked him down through multiple different angles, you sweet talked him in whatever way you had to do. You got the solution. They did you a solid, and you went to a lot of effort, but none of this should have been necessary. Like, shouldn't a vendor who's like has Mac in their name like support Mac OS,
forget Sonoma
current version. I know it's not even Sonoma, it's Ventura.
Oh, they're not
stuck on.
They're not Sonoma compatible.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not shocked about that.
Mac Practice, and I knew that.
Yeah. But even still, like, I don't even understand how they can, it's like, to this point, how they could not support Sonoma. Like, it's been out for a while. Like, I support Sonoma at this point. Like, you know what I mean? Like, come on. Like, I mean, I'm not running it yet, but pretty soon. But it's appalling to me. So this reminds me of Lightspeed, like 20 years ago, when they were running on like open base, and it was like you've got to make sure the database starts before the app, and like there's a system preference thing to like fix this and it was like a lot of moving parts, and it was a very kludgy feeling thing, and it was kludgy. But like Mac Practice, they've been around for a long time. I know they're dealing with really important data, and they have to, there's compliance things and whatever, but like, there's gotta be some way that, I don't know. I don't want to tell them how to run their company, but that's kind of crazy. If like you are only supporting the Mac and you're not supporting the latest Mac OS or even the latest update to the prior Mac OS.
You got
for multiple weeks. Yeah. I just think that's appalling, because how can you run a medical practice like that we're going to talk more about this on a future show about, private cloud versus public cloud, self-hosted versus, in the cloud, or like, Carrio mail server running on my Mac Mini back in the day in my office versus Microsoft 365, like philosophically, because in this situation, if you had hired a vendor like MacPractice, but they're cloud-based and they're down, all you can do is beg them. You can say, please, fix your stuff. My clients need you. But like, at least the clients know, like, yes, you recommended it, maybe, let's say, but it's not like your fault. And there's nothing really you could do to flip the switch and turn it back on again. So I kind of like the concept of, let someone else handle the infrastructure, compatibility, security, all that stuff. Like, I can just help the end user, like, optimize their workflows. Like, we can focus on, like, squeezing the best optimization out of it. Let someone else handle the infrastructure. Now you're kind of handling the infrastructure, but you're dependent on this company providing services. It's like the worst of all scenarios. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an
and there's no
case study.
Yeah, there's no technical support bulletin that you can subscribe to where you're just going to this like lambs to the slaughter. Like, hey, update, but don't, or there should be a pop-up like, but if you, don't update your OS.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Just
right.
Yeah.
Well, hooray for you.
But yeah.
Well, I didn't punch the sky, Sam. I didn't do a Sam Valencia punch the sky.
Little Judd Nelson Breakfast Club,
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to leave you on a funny note.
Let me tease first. So sorry.
I don't mean to monopolize the show.
No, this is great, Jerry. You called the meeting. You've got the talking stick. This is great. I do want to tease. So we have some Patreon episodes coming up, like we discussed. I mean, this is actually a topic we're planning to discuss. We talked about it in a previous Patreon show recently, and Jason Harrison, friend of the show, prior guest and future upcoming guest, hopefully very soon, gave us some feedback about this whole private cloud versus public cloud conversation that came up in one of those recent shows. And this is a great case study about that. So I think we'll talk more about that in a Patreon show, as well as I want to talk about, again, monitoring networks. And Jason also offered some feedback about that. You guys know about this. How do you pronounce it? Domots?
Yeah.
Domots. Okay. Thank you. Domots, for network monitoring.
Gabagool and Domots.
But, that's like a comprehensive network monitoring, like tell me everything on the network and what's going on and whatever. I'm also talking about monitoring for uptime, which, by the way, I've needed a few times recently on my own home network. So we'll talk about that on the Patreon show, about transitioning your sort of like network management, network updates and maintenance kind of like plan for clients to more like network monitoring as a service for your clients. So I think that's relevant here as well. And then, I think those are kind of the main topics we'll be talking about on Patreon coming up. So I wanted to talk about that first. But Jerry, you're going to bring us out on a high note, just like you brought us in today. So go for it.
Yeah. Funny client story. And again, I tell clients they can text me because, generally I'm still doing pretty well with the text. And this is a elderly gentleman and he's on our managed service plan. So he messages me once in a while. Usually I have to tell him, don't worry about it. You're not scammed. We'll take care of it. And sometimes it ends up being more billable time. So he texted me this morning and he said, I spotted a SanDisk, whatever that is, under my desktop. I guess it's yours. What should I do with it? Right. Right.
Okay.
Under my desktop. What should I do?
Meaning like on his desk maybe, or?
Well, that was the thing. Joe. So I said, hi, his name isn't John, but I said, hi, John, that's probably an external thumb drive that you might've plugged in, right? Cause it shows up on the desktop as SanDisk, right? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So he said, I said, the SanDisk is not me, but it's nothing to be concerned about. It's a plugged in drive.
Yeah.
So he sent me back something like, I forget what it was something else that was kind of cryptic. So I said, let me call him up. So he found like a thumb drive that said SanDisk got it, in his office, but he called it his desktop.
Oh boy.
But he said under his desktop. So I should have known, right?
Yeah, under.
But
like
here I am
on the floor. Yeah, like most people would say on the floor, right? Like he's like, it's a little misleading. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm talking to her for a while, and I couldn't really. I said, "Wait a minute, are you talking about something that's a physical item that you found that's called SanDisk?" Yes, of course,
on your desktop.
I'm like, oh Jesus.
Oh man, classic. Yeah, that is classic. I love the concept of though, like, is that you? Because like that's what everybody asks about everything.
Always.
There's a pop-up and they're like, is that you? I'm like, no, not every pop-up is me. Like, it's not me. Yeah, I love that. Well,
or they say or you probably know this already, but I've got that SanDisk icon on my desktop.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like, yeah.
What? I don't know anything,
Right. Should I know this? I don't remember this. What are we talking about? Yeah. Oh man. And it's even harder when you have a team, right? Because then they're telling you something like, you told me this, and this probably happens to you, Sam, and you're like, now I need to find out if someone told them that or if they just made this up. It's like, do they think I told them? I didn't tell them. Maybe it was Tim. Probably not, but
it's even worse for me because I have a Sammy on my team.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
Half the time they're like, hey Sammy, you said this. I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm like, that's not, I would never say that.
Yeah. Well, I've shared this on the show. You don't even need a team. I had that client who said to me, you told me never to update.
Never update.
I'm like, what?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
It never. Especially if you run Mac practice, never update.
Yeah. That's actually good advice in that case.
Good policy there.
Right. That's a really good policy. I love at the end of a long call, be on the phone for an hour with the client. They'll say, all right, thanks, Tim. And I'm like, duh, like I don't even get credit for this. Like just gave them all this value. And they're like, Tim gets credit,
Oh
man. It's the joys of having a team. All right. Well, good talking to you guys.
All right, fellas.
To use your term.
Always a good one.